And joining us now on the debate, Steve Munro, transit advocate and author of the transit blog, stevemunro.ca. Jeff Casello, civil engineer, professor at the University of Waterloo. Peter Kuitenbrouwer, Toronto columnist with the National Post. Christy Luo, doctoral student, Oxford University. And we welcome back TDC chair and councillor for Davenport, Adam Giambrone. Okay, everybody, glad to have you all alongside for our discussion tonight. Our Thursday discussions are very much influenced by the emails that we get and the posts we get at our website. So I want to read a couple of those and then remind everybody, I guess before we do that, that Mike Miner is also standing by somewhere at an undisclosed location in this building. And if you want to get involved in the discussion tonight, dial us up at tvo.org/theagenda, and Mike is standing by for an online chat. Send us your emails at theagenda@tvo.org. You can find us on Twitter. Go to the Inside Agenda Producers blog, and we're happy to have you join the conversation. Okay, here are two of the emails, posts, etc. that we got tonight that helped us form tonight's discussion. Torontonians, myself included, this person says, are always complaining about the price to ride the TTC, but it's really not that bad. We're contributing to cutting our carbon footprint, and the system is pretty safe and fast. If you factor in the price of gas, car insurance, car maintenance, and other affiliated costs, $121 a month to ride the subway as many times as you want is really cheap. How about this from somebody else? Here's what he wants on the system. Meaningful schedules, later subway service, lower fares. I know where they're high, but I know why they're high, rather, but they're too high for the working poor. Okay, let's start to get into this. And Christy, why don't I start with you tonight? Is this your television debut?
I guess so.
Okay, excellent. You heard the interview with Adam.
I have.
You heard some of the things he had to say about customer service and what he's trying to do with the system. What's your reaction?
Well, I hear from Mr. Hume's article a cultural change, so to speak, and I disagree with that. I don't think it's ever changed. I think Mr. Giambrone and yourself are in the business of public service, and to serve the public is the raison d'etre. And once that's changed, I question the entire mindset of the TTC or the service that the public is being provided.
You don't think they feel it?
Well, I think that I just disagree with the shifted focus.
Disagree with the shifted focus in what respect?
In customer service, because right now I hear that this is an opportunity to improve in customer service, and I think customer service is rather a paradigm as opposed to a focus that could be shifted.
Okay, Steve, what do you say?
Well, one of the most important factors in making transit attractive is good service, but service is a lot more than someone smiling and saying hello to you when you get on the bus and streetcar.
Well, that wouldn't be a bad thing.
It wouldn't hurt. But I mean, frankly, riding around the system lately, I've noticed a lot of passengers getting on, making a point of saying hello to the operator, and a lot of operators being pleasant with customers. So I mean, the results of the last few months' upheaval has certainly shown itself on a small way in the field, and I don't think that's something that was been done unofficially. It's just happened.
Is that different? That spirit?
That spirit is different. I mean, it was something I always noticed. If you rode a GO Transit bus, the operators tended to know the passengers because the GO trips, they're more commuter trips, the same people take the same bus every day, and you'd have that kind of pleasantry. You didn't see it on the TTC because it's, whatever mob gets on to stop. But that's only one part of it.
Sure.
There's the quality of service that's on the street. So there's the question of how well the TTC manages the service they've got there. People get really cheesed off when they see 3 buses come along in a row
and not one for 15 minutes.
And not one for 15
right.
minutes. Okay,
hold the thought, because I don't want to get into every single thing right now. Let's go around the horn here. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I think the important thing to think about is we all have travel choices, and we're consumers of a service. And when we wake up in the morning, we may ride our bike, we may walk, we may use our car, or we may use TTC or whatever the transit service is. And we have to think about being reliable to that consumer from the get-go. So if you go online and find real-time information about how TTC is performing and you arrive at the station, it should be reliable. And when you get on the train, you can have a level of expectation. You can have crush loads in a system. In fact, you like to have crush loads in your system because it means you're generating lots of revenue per operator. And you can have that in people as long as it's consistent with their expectation. Then you're satisfied. But when you have what appears to be decreasing qualities of service, and when you have increasing fares, and you have loads that are more than you expected, and you have long delays in your subway system, then people rightfully get unhappy because they think that there are other alternatives and I've made this choice. Okay. And we're asking really people to make a choice that is often for the betterment of society and sometimes not so much for themselves. So that's the real challenge.
Peter, where are you coming from?
I'm glad that that you used that term "crush load," Jeff, because that's what we live with on the TTC. And you know, I think that what a lot of people, like all of this boiling over of this customer frustration, really has to do with a fundamental point, which is that people don't get a seat. You know, and they don't get a seat because the streetcar doesn't come. Certainly, I'm pretty rarely get a seat on the streetcar. I don't often get a seat on the subway. I don't know. I mean, we obviously have viewers from all over Ontario, so I invite them to come to town and stand up on the TTC.
Adam, you made comparisons with other transit systems, Chicago, New York, maybe Boston's in that mix as well. How do they handle their customer service issues differently from us, if at all?
You know, there's a great video on the MTA site of the new chairman of the MTA.
That's New York.
In New York, who's just spent 100 days on the job and is really talking about exactly the same thing. In fact, he talks about next trains. He said we have a system in New York of how we determine when the next train is, and that's we look down the tunnel and we see if there's a light there. And you know, and talk about customer notice, crowding, inadequate service. I mean, really, if I changed it around, inserted myself in there, you'd think I was talking and changed some of the images, you'd think we were talking about the TTC. These are challenges that are faced all across major transit. Overloaded systems in London, overloaded in Paris. Lines, you know, in New York, they're trying to build the Second Avenue subway since 1960. They're still working on it. And we have more service on the street today than we have since 1989. On the system, the largest service addition on buses. It's not perfect. We have a lot of work to do. We have to be better operators, more subway service, but we also have record ridership. So we've got huge challenges, success stories, but a lot of them are the same in other large cities.
Here's somebody who thinks you have more than just challenges. I don't know if you read Sarah Fulford in this month's Toronto Life, but here she goes. A wealthy acquaintance of mine, Sarah writes, who has lived in Toronto for almost a decade, confessed to me recently that she had never once been on the TTC. I was shocked. Doesn't she know that riding the streetcar is one of the great romantic pleasures of living in Toronto? University kids wear station-specific buttons, for crying out loud. But riding the TTC has become so unpleasant, I now understand her point of view. If you can afford to travel another way, why would you undergo the daily humiliation? Peter, is it really daily humiliation?
Not daily, but certainly weekly.
Occasionally?
It's frequent. There is, I mean, humiliation is a big word. I mean, it depends. I mean, I just got on a streetcar the other day, you know, going from City Hall to my home. I actually live in Councillor Giambrone's ward, so he's also my local councillor. Like, everybody's wet, everyone's sticking to one another, you know, it smells. Like, if you have a choice, you would not take public transit to get home that day.
Steve, how about it? Daily humiliation?
It's not daily, but it as Peter said, it happens often enough that people notice it. And one of the analogies I've often used, systems like to talk about, you know, whether they, you know, 90% they hit their target or 95% they hit their target. Well, if it's 90%, that means 1 time in 10 they don't hit the target. Well, if all someone does is take a commute, that means 1 day a week they're going to have a bad experience.
Now, is 90% a decent success rate?
Well, it's hard to go, you know, going from 90 to 95.
Of course, but the subway has a 98 or 99.4% on-time rate.
It has an on-time rate, but the problem is that delays do occur. I mean, just earlier this afternoon,
delays are down over the last 2 years.
Yeah, but they do occur, and people are inconvenienced by them. So the problem is that the likelihood that you will run into a problem somewhere, and of course the more you use the system, the more likely you are to bump into a problem in the course of your travels.
Hold on a second, Adam. I'll get you on the daily humiliation. Jeff wants
There's 2 points, though, that are really important. It's one is that we have very low load standards relative to the rest of the world. I mean, if you go to so if we were to put tape on the floor and make it 1 meter by 1 meter square, in North America, if we put 4 people in there, that's a lot. And if we go to Europe, they put 6 people in that 1 meter by 1 meter. And if you go to Japan, they've got 8 people in that spot. So when we're talking about crush loads in North America, we're talking about very different conditions than the rest of the world.
Relatively pleasant.
Relatively pleasant. And the other thing that I think is super important is delays happen on the TTC. Well, I came from Waterloo this afternoon. It took me 2.5 hours to come on the 401. And as you look around the 401, there's 1 person in every car. And people accept that for a different reason, because they feel like they have control of their own situation, because they're in their car and they can search out a different route. And where the TTC and other transit agencies, all the things we're talking about tonight are not unique to the TTC, but where a TTC falls down is they don't come on the loudspeaker and say the issue is that there's a switch that is stuck and we expect a 30-second delay to move them, because that takes away all the uncertainty and all the open-endedness, and it puts some control back in the travelers.
Daily humiliation, Adam?
Well, I mean, I think the point about rider, how many people you squish in there is good. I mean, Tokyo is rated as it's the largest system in the world, carrying the most number of people, and it's got the same in Europe. Again, a lot of these systems get packed in there. I mean, I think, look, we strive for a higher standard. We don't always just strive to compare ourselves to others. We need to set our own standards here. People have very high standards, and you're right. I mean, there needs to be better communication. People do want that. In fact, one of the things, though, I think that gets the perception up is we do e-alerts. Now, you can't get them in the subway until we get the cellular contracts are coming in a couple months that will begin to install cellular service in the subways. Then that will work. But, you know, that makes people aware of delays across the system where you might not have been otherwise. So some of the perception is out there. Look, I use the system every day. I can go months.
Use it in rush hour?
Yeah, I commute. And I can go, you know, I literally go sometimes months in rush, an hour, you know, it's a half an hour without facing a delay of more than 1 or 2 minutes.
Let me put this to Christy, because you lived in Paris, you've lived in London.
I have.
New York too?
Yes.
Okay, so you have, and obviously have ridden the transit systems in all of those places.
I try my best to.
Okay, very good. Keeping that carbon footprint down. So you've got a good sense about how well this city is doing relative to the others. What can you tell us?
Well, I think what the other cities do have, and like Mr. Giambrone said, we shouldn't compare ourselves. We definitely should have a model to which we can aspire. And I think some of these cities are doing well, and I have rosy, you know, glasses. I go on the TTC, I'm very happy. There's no urine, there's no rats. I mean, that's a lot better than Paris and New York. So, so I am very happy about the TTC in that respect. But I do think that, you know, in terms of regional development priorities, Toronto has quite a lot to learn. I do feel that there all these investments and the fact that our model is based on New York, and we're very envious of New York. Mr. Giambrone has said that, you know, we compared to New York, we're almost there, but I don't know if that's such a good thing to aspire to. Perhaps we should look at our regional development patterns and respond to that.
I have ridden, is that the right past participle? I have ridden the New York subway system in the summertime, and it is hot. They don't have any air conditioning on those cars, and it smells sometimes.
Same thing for London, yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
So relatively speaking, as you look at some of the bigger cities in the world, you don't think we've got that much to complain about here?
I think people are always going to complain, and I think that's just, it's about managing expectations for people. And people are not, I mean, we're not blind. We're mobile, the young, I guess I can call myself fairly, I represent the youth vote. You know, we're incredibly mobile. We see things and we compare things. So we manage our expectations. But what we're looking for is that politicians are not just saying, well, you know, we are going to throw some money at the problem, but rather provide us with an answer
Let's follow up on that. Let's go to some ideas here. And you know, Rocco Rossi, who's running for mayor right now, had this very cute quip not too long ago that the TTC is the world's best 1970 transit system, but unfortunately it's the year 2010. So let's start naming some things that would make Toronto's transit system jump into the 21st century. And I want to go around the table. Just give me an idea. Go, Jeff.
A really simple thing is we have subway, and then we have cars operating in mixed traffic, streetcar or buses, and we've got nothing in between, Spadina line accepted. That's the only place where we've upgraded any of our streetcars. And in all of the other cities that Christy was talking about, they have a whole wealth of modes. So there's subways, there's elevated systems, there's light rail transit that is ubiquitous across this, and they are outside of mixed traffic. So they are somewhere in between subway and buses and streetcars. And you can cover the city much faster and much more of the city with light rail, and that's part of the proposal that's coming.
Steve, give me an idea.
Definitely, one of the things we were chatting before about was fare collection. And there's a whole issue of how the TTC collects fares.
The old-fashioned way at the moment.
The old-fashioned way, and of course there was all the brouhaha about the tokens, not having tokens last fall when the fare change occurred. But there are two important points. One is that we have to figure out just not how we're going to collect the fare, but what the fare will be, because people talk about, for example, eliminating the fare boundary at the 416 boundary between the city of Toronto and the municipalities around. Someone has to figure out how much you're going to pay to come from Steeles and Yonge to downtown. Who's going to pay the extra subsidy if we're going to give a cheaper ride to someone from Mississauga to come into the city? So that's one issue. The technology is an issue in terms of implementation, but also in terms of capability, because people point at systems in other cities And I'm not certain that Presto, which has been sort of burbling away at the province for a while, has all of the technical capabilities that the TTC would like to see.
This is
the
like
flexibility,
the smart card, that
the
kind
smart
of
card.
thing?
But
Okay.
there's smart cards and there's smart cards, and a lot depends on what you implement.
Peter, give us an idea.
I'm going to go back to some good old-fashioned ideas from some former chief general managers of the TTC, namely David Gunn and Rick Ducharme, who had something called state of good repair. Now, Adam's been throwing out a lot of numbers tonight. 20 years ago, the TTC had 300 streetcars. Today, we have 250 streetcars. 20 years ago, the TTC had 1,787 trolley buses and buses. Today, we have 1,500 buses on the street.
Why the reduction?
So, because we just don't have we don't have the rolling stock. Well, the ridership went down, the ridership went back up. But in terms of the streetcars, certainly the problem is that a lot of them have broken down. They haven't fixed them. I don't think we have 250 streetcars in service in the system right now. I think a lot of them are in the shop. And my good old-fashioned, and we used to, years ago, the TTC used to actually found out that a shipment of buses from Montreal was being sent to Cuba because they no longer needed them in Montreal. They went to the docks in Montreal, bought those buses, and brought them to Toronto and fixed them up and put them into service. That's what I want to see. I want to see them fixing the rolling stock.
Adam, you've heard some of these ideas. How much of this is doable?
Well, Peter's brings up a good point, because the TTC is closer to 1,700 buses today. In fact, bought 1,500 new buses over the last 5 years. The largest and quickest replacement of our bus stock in history. We have the largest fleet of hybrid buses, second largest in North America. One of the newest fleets of buses. Still have some of those Cuban buses though running, or the 881. But the other one,
the problem with the buses is that they only fit 4 out of every 5 people that fit on the previous bus. So we have the same number of buses, but 80% of the capacity.
You have more seats, but you're
got
clamoring
some
for
issues
seats.
there, but you've got a bus fleet that's been renewed. You have a streetcar fleet that is going to be the largest order of light rail vehicles in the world, purchased in July, started arriving first test cars 2011, 2012.
Who did we buy those
Bombardier,
from?
and they'll be made up in the Thunder Bay, coming here. That's a remark.
25% local content.
And that's remarkable as well.
25% Canadian content.
And that's remarkable. But the other thing that's remarkable is we also have a new subway. In the coming months this summer, the new Toronto Rocket subway cars will begin arriving, and by 2012, mostly it will be here. So we will have taken the buses and renewed them, the streetcars and renewed them, and the subway fleet and renewed them. So I think it's quite a remarkable achievement.
Mike Miner, stand by. I'm going to get to you in 1 second. I just want to ask Adam one more thing, and that is we just had a post come on. We put it up on the screen a second ago saying, and it actually reminded me, they've changed the name of the Toronto Police Force to the Toronto Police Service, because they thought that more accurately reflected what they wanted the police to do, not force people, but serve people. And this person put up something saying, it's called the Toronto Transit Commission, but maybe you should call it the Toronto Transit Service to better reflect what the whole idea of the thing should be.
I think that may be at the end of a process. You'd want to look at how you were doing culture change, which is what we're doing around customer service, which has to infiltrate a whole organization. Simple logo change, name change, that's the easy part. You do that in a couple days and off you go. What you have to really tackle is the more substantive issues, and maybe those discussion comes at the end of the process, not at the beginning.
Okay. Speaking of discussion, we're having one here. We're also having one online tonight at tvo.org/theagenda. And our fifth column blogger, Mike Miner, is keeping an eye on that. Mike, what are they saying online tonight?
The back channel is on fire, Steve, and it started off down here with just a shopping list of complaints about the TTC. To be fair, there's as many people who say they really like it and are glad that there's a decent option to get around that doesn't involve cars. But people are talking about unfriendly drivers, delays, inconsistent arrivals of buses and streetcars, and the streetcars being filled to capacity when they do come. Feeling of danger on the buses at night, stations in disrepair, steadily increasing fares. It just goes on. And Vlad, one of our chatters, said that he thinks the culture is the biggest problem, and it goes right from the top to the bottom. And I think that this is reflected by a lot of people on there, that they feel that the system is broke and the people involved in it don't care much. We have Lawrence Louis online, who's a land use and transportation planner at the IBI group, and he thinks that the TTC is resting on their laurels from having a reputation in the 70s and 80s as being a world-class system, and that these issues are really raking up on the radar, getting a lot of attention because of all of the social media aspect of it, but he thinks that it's been simmering under the surface for quite a while.
Okay, Mike, thanks for that. We'll check back in with you at close to the top of the clock and just get a final update from you. Let's read this as well that Christina Blizzard wrote in the Toronto Sun last month and picks up on that issue of culture change that Mike just referenced. Ask experts, and they say the TTC needs a quote-unquote culture change That's a polite way to say it needs a kick in the backside. They need commissioners who act like commissioners and not as managers, forever trying to micromanage the system. The TTC was once innovative, progressive, not anymore. Adam, is that a fair shot?
No. I think, quite frankly, when you look at it, we have the largest expansion program in North America, the largest light rail expansion in progress in the world, and a transit expansion program that is larger than the entire Obama stimulus package for transit for the entire United States. Now, that's a lot of that's credit to the province, who has invested very substantially in public transit. What's happening here on expansion is amazing, and you look to people, when you go over to Europe, we just had the Paris Metro Engineering Group, and that is a company, they looked at here and they couldn't believe the scope, because there are huge amounts of investment. Now, the problem is some of those lines won't open until 2015, 2016. So you're asking people to hold on a long time. But you know, there are a lot of really good things here. Electronic communications are moving. People don't think they're moving fast. They're moving faster than the rest of North America and Europe. You list them. So there are a lot of complaints, but there are also a lot of good things, and we have to take the good with the bad.
Jeff, a culture change, does it need it?
I think that in some ways Toronto has a huge advantage because there is such a solid ridership base. And I think that what we're talking about tonight is really symptomatic of a huge problem throughout North America, and that's the infrastructure deficit. It's not TTC that is suffering from lack of maintenance. It's highways, it's water systems, it's sewer systems, it's hydro system. Everything is collapsing. We haven't invested enough in our infrastructure for the last 4 decades, really in the post-war period for that time. And so TTC is symptomatic of this larger problem, and it influences people maybe more directly because you don't see that your water line is on its last legs, and maybe in 3 years your water's not going to come out of the pipe. But the fact that you are able to make the expansion plans that you are speaks volumes about the commitment that the federal and the provincial governments have made in Ontario and in Canada. And as you say correctly, I came from Philadelphia, and a city that was really dysfunctional and remains very dysfunctional in its transit service. And from a infrastructure perspective, they have a system that Toronto would be dying for in terms of the quantity of rail system that they have, and they operate it so poorly that their ridership is about a third of what Toronto's is a day.
Peter, let me read this from the Toronto Board of Trade, and I'll get you to comment on this because everybody's concerned about whether the TTC has adequate money to run the kind of service people expect. Here we go. Michael, top of page 4. Adjusting for inflation and the rise in employees, the TTC's productivity increased by 1% between 1999 and 2002, but declined by 5% from 2003 to 2008. This drop in productivity is costly. Had the TTC's productivity remained constant from 2003 rather than declining, the overall cost of operations by 2008 would have been approximately $71 million less. Peter, where are they wasting money?
I would say staff, because if you look at it, the TTC is going to have had as many riders last year as it had 20 years ago. So what happened was in the late 80s, there was a huge boom and TTC was doing great. Then it started to drop, which is alarming that the city is growing and the TTC is dropping. But the only thing that didn't drop was the number of people who work for the TTC. So 20 years ago, we had less than 10,000 people working for the TTC, and now we have 12,000 people working for the TTC, but we're moving the same number of people. So the problem is the productivity per person.
But Peter, I hate to sound like an apologist for the TTC, but I have to come to their defense here. There have been major changes. For example, we talked about loading standards earlier. The TTC now has a policy of running proportionately better service than the demands would quote unquote justify than they did 20 years ago. That takes more staff. There have been changes in provincial labor legislation which have restricted the length of time you can have operators on the road without having breaks, the number of hours they can work per day. That makes changes. There have also been additional services the TTC has created that simply didn't exist 20 years ago.
Okay. Let me hear Jeff and Adam on this as well.
It's important. You can't just do a 20-year comparison without
the important thing
adjusting
is just the amount of drivers you need to provide the same service that you did 20 years ago, maybe 30% more now, because congestion on the roadway slows down the streetcars and slows down the buses. So the way you figure out how many drivers is how long it takes one driver to make a cycle. And if the cycle takes 40% longer, you need 40% more drivers to provide the same level of service. But I will say this, and this probably won't make me very popular back at the TTC, but unionization is an enormous problem throughout the transit industry. The costs have been growing extraordinarily across the world as unionization increases.
What are you going to do about that?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, that's for the labor scientists, but we have to, I think, look and see the value that someone is contributing to society, what the pay rates are, what the right level of pay are. I mean,
let me ask Adam about that.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
How does the union contribute to the positive operation of the TTC?
The union's been has a long history at the TTC, going back actually before the actual TTC was created. It was Toronto Street Railroads. The union's been around for a long time. They obviously have a role to play.
Why do you say that? Because he says they should be out.
Well, no, I don't think he said that, and I don't think anyone really expects, I mean, can have an arbitrary debate about whether they're going to be out. I mean, short of, Mike Harris was around and the union stayed in there, all these things happened. That's not I'm not sure, a very particular useful question to have, because I don't think anyone actually believes that the unions are going to be thrown out there. I mean, maybe the McGuinty government's going to do it. I doubt it. And in fact, what happens is a lot of their stuff comes down to legislation. The last contract was arbitrated. And so you have some of those controls taken away from management to be able to adjust it, because you're not prepared. The province of Ontario, all three political parties are not prepared to have a long TTC strike.
Right. Quick comeback on that?
Yeah, I just think the important thing, and the reason why we have labor unions, is because they provide a better service than ununionized labor, because they have better training and better skill sets and so on. And so I think the challenge for the TTC and for all transit agencies is to empower their employees to do the best job they can. I'll give you just a really quick bit. In Philadelphia, the guys used to get buses ordered for them, then they'd have to bring them in and take them apart so that the mechanics would have a chance to work on them in perpetuity. And finally, the agency got smart and brought the mechanics into the ordering process and said, this is how you should build the bus, and so it saved them 40% in labor costs for the next 10 years.
Christy, let me ask you about this. Apparently we're getting a lot of chat tonight online about the way people purchase their fares. This whole kind of antiquated system of using tickets and tokens and cash fare in a box, and why don't we have smart cards. What would it take to actually move to transform the system into something smarter as it relates to fares?
Well, I think the Presto card is a great step forward.
What is that?
It's that smart card. I think Jeff just now had one,
this
actually.
This is the London version.
This is from London. This is the Oyster card used by the London Tubes. I'm sure.
Hold it still, and we'll just get a shot of it. There you go. And explain, how does it function?
So what you do is that you can put money in it, and you scan it.
Face it to that camera there. Good.
You can scan in and scan out, and it would actually, like Jeff explained earlier, it charges you, but then when you scan out, it reimburses you. So it charges you by distance that you travel. And this technology has been around for many years.
But the TTC prides itself on being able to go from northeast Scarborough to southwest Etobicoke for the same fare as if you go from College to Dundas, right?
Fair
so
enough.
You're changing you'd be changing a lot of the way you run the thing, right?
Fair enough. And there's a lot of debates on both sides. But if we're talking technology, at least this is the type of technology that is available, has been available for many years.
We're showing cards. So this is my bank card, and it has one of these. It has one of these chips. The number on your bank card is not going to be particularly useful, but this is the next generation, where you actually, instead of having a specific technology that sort of changes every 20 years and you have to invest, what you should be going to is a contactless payment where you're using your bank card and your credit card just like you would at Tim Hortons or another merchant. And that's the next generation. That's where London, New York are moving to next. Your cell phone paying directly. We have to be careful while we move to electronic fare payment not to get stuck in the 1998 model of high technology, to be able to not just this, but cell phones, all of that new technology.
So are you moving to this?
This is what the province and TTC, it's the provincial program Presto. We're excited to move forward on it. 12 stations in theory are coming forward if the province gets around to doing it, but we have to make sure we don't get locked into a system.
And Peter, here's the next thing. To ride the Toronto Transit system within the boundaries of the 416, okay, maybe that's an answer, maybe that's something in the future. But then if you're just like on the other side of Steeles, you're talking about a different transit system. And if you're on the other side of the Humber River, you're talking about a different transit system. You know, riders don't care about these semi-artificial boundaries. How do you bring this all into one semi-intelligently functioning system?
It's an interesting question. David Signacki was asked that question by the Board of Trade, and he is the former budget chief of Toronto. His answer was, what about if we did something like we took all the GO trains and we took all the TTC subways and we made it into Toronto Train? Then we take all the TTC buses, and we take all the GO buses, and we take all the Viva buses, which operate in York region, for example, and we make it Toronto Bus. And then we let Toronto Train compete against Toronto Bus. And while we're at it, how about we put some people from the private sector onto the boards of these organizations and see if they can run a better railroad?
What do you think of that, Mr. Chairman?
Well, the last time there was citizens on the board, they went out and bought an airline, Vacation Air in 1989, and the commissioners, the elected representatives of the city, didn't even know that they bought a commission. Look, you can have a commission made up of private citizens, commissioners.
What about the idea, though?
Of those
Toronto Train, Toronto Bus.
You know,
break down the artificial boundaries.
Well, look, 70% of our riders use a bus or a surface vehicle. They also use the train. These systems are integrated. They are always going to have to be integrated.
But you can't, there's no integrated way of paying to get on them.
Well, you could, but that's an electronic fare payment. You could do lots of different things. That's not really, I don't think, the answer. And composition of boards, sure, you can change it up. We'll probably change it up. We'll go back. We'll keep changing. Everyone does this. They did it in Vancouver. Elected officials on, elected officials off, private on, private off. There are more fundamental questions than the makeup of the board that we need to address.
Steve, there are already transit systems in Europe, other places in the world, where you have separate operators that operate different chunks of the system. But the revenue and the subsidies are managed by a central authority, and you sort that out separately. The fact that the blue bus company runs the bus on Yonge Street and the red bus company runs the bus on Shepherd, that's a completely separate issue from how you handle the fare integration. And the big problem, and this is going to sound like I'm beating on the province, but it's an issue for the province and for the municipalities. Everyone says they want fare integration across Steeles Avenue. Well, right now, if someone rides across Steeles Avenue, they pay a York Region fare and a Toronto fare.
Right.
Well, you can have an Oyster card that will still charge them a York Region fare and a Toronto fare, but it's still the same amount of money. If you want to give them a cheaper ride, somebody has to pay to subsidize
About
that.
$100 million a year.
Now, I mean, an example I can give you in cross subsidies, yes, we're building a subway extension into York Region up to Vaughan. The TTC's own estimate is that the day that opens, the TTC will lose $14 million a year net of new revenue.
Why?
Because it will cost more to run the subway than they will get in revenue from the passengers riding it. And either that has to come in additional subsidy from York Region or Toronto or somewhere, or it has to come by service cuts elsewhere in the
30
system.
seconds left. Go ahead.
Okay, but the concept of transit subsidy is wrong in the get-go because no transportation mode pays for itself. So the fact that TTC is covering 75% of its operating costs, which it did in 2008, is a very good number. Most systems, Portland, Oregon, the North American poster child for transit systems, covers 15% of its operating costs because they've chosen to run ubiquitous, very late service, very frequent service, and they just took on the costs and pay through taxation. So 75% is something that the TTC should wear proudly.
Am I out of time? I'm out of time, eh? What a shame. We're really flying there. That hour just flew by. Okay, let's thank the left-hand side of the table. Jeff Casello from University of Waterloo, Christy Luo, doctoral candidate at Oxford University, Peter Kuitenbrouwer, columnist for the National Post. On the other side of the table, the transit advocate Steve Munro and Adam Giambrone, the TTC chair and Toronto City Councillor. Good of all of you to join me tonight around the table here. Thanks so much.